March 2nd, Advisory Committee to order. And this meeting is being held remotely as an alternative means of public access pursuant to an order issued by the Governor of Massachusetts dated March 12, 2020, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so that the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. Bless you. The advisory committee will be
Thank you.
recording this meeting as we have agreed to do throughout this season. So if there is anybody that is on the call that intends to record the meeting or is recording the meeting, please identify themselves by either the raised hand function or other appropriate means and let me know. And I don't see anyone. So we will go on to item number 2 on our agenda, which is questions from the public on items not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public that have questions at this point in time? If so, please use the raise hand function. Identify yourself by name and address all of your questions to the chair. I'm
Not seeing anyone.
And I'm not seeing anyone either. So we will go on to item 3 of this evening's agenda, which is further discussion and potential vote on Article 10. We have already voted affirmatively all the CPC projects in Article M, other than the Bear Cove Park project. So we come to discuss that. And Julie, would you bring us up to date?
Thanks, Bob. So last week, Bear Cove Committee met and they made some decisions about this restroom project and other future initiatives. Claudia Eaton is the new chair of the Bear Cove Park Committee, and I don't see her on yet. We've been in communication with her, so I'm not sure if she is going to be late or not. But anyway, she's the new chair. We also have JR Fry on right now, our town engineer. So thank you, JR, for stopping in. I know he's got a busy night. He's got to switch over to the Board of Selectmen meeting after this. But anyway, JR is here in case any engineering questions come up. But anyway, I want to thank Claudia and the Bear Cove Park Committee for putting together these, going through the CPC process and then answering tons of questions up until now. So at their meeting last week, the committee decided to stick with the original proposed design of the restroom, which is, it's called a flush system, and it includes vault storage of the waste, which would then get pumped out. Instead of using the Clivus dry compost system. Now that was a question that came up at the joint meeting when the project was first introduced, but they decided not to pursue that because of it's basically ended up being the same price. And there was a concern about, I guess, if you put trash into the Clivus system, maybe if you're picnicking and someone threw some leftover trash in there, it could attract insects in the system, and that wouldn't be good for the when you're going to the bathroom. So, anyway, so they decided about that, and then they also decided to go ahead with the plan to build a pavilion. And the pavilion was one of the Bear Cove projects that was not funded, but basically it's a cover which provides shelter in case of rain or a thunderstorm or sun, and then put like a picnicking area underneath. And that would be located by the bathroom. So that's why I'm mentioning it. And they would like to use the $50,000 given to the town by the Cove Apartment Project to fund this project. So that's an idea that they have as of late. So this CPC project, there was difficulty. I found it difficult to wrap my arms around because most CPC projects are currently, they're defined in design and exact costs. Most of the time you're fixing something or you're adding on a fencing somewhere, or it's not building things that have not been there. That's different in this case because there's no restroom there. So there's a design option which has been selected, and the approximate cost to eliminate the waste, the manufacturer said, would be about 25 cents per flush, but we don't know how much it would flush during a season. So there's a variable about the cost of the pump out for the system. And then also this project would still need to go before the various permitting authorities in town, including the Conservation Commission, the Board of Health, and also it would need to be approved by the National Park Service, which still has say over what gets put into Bear Cove Park. I also wanted to mention that I did check on the Lynch Field bathroom, and I had mentioned this last week as maybe sort of a, hey, there's already a bathroom nearby, maybe this could be used on the weekends. This bathroom is owned by the town, but they are in they have a concessionaires agreement with Hingham Youth Football, Hingham Little League, and Hingham Youth Hockey. The hockey team doesn't play there, but they do store some equipment there. And so they use this building. The concessionaire agreement is still in place, and I have a copy of that agreement, but basically it appears that it's not a viable solution for having a public bathroom open to the public. Hi, Claudia. I see Claudia Eden has joined. So we got to Article M, question 2, which is the $67,800 for the restroom in Bear Cove Park. And I have rewritten the comment to include some information, for example, the 25 cents per flush estimate, and that we really don't know how much the toilet would be flushed during the season. And I spoke with J.R. Fry, and he has an estimate about what it would cost to pump it out once. So maybe if you only needed to empty that vault once, it would cost about $200 per tank pump out. And then I added in some language about the fact that the Bear Cove Park Committee would also like to go forth with their own project of building the pavilion as well. And then finally, I added in some language at the end where I felt it was important to say, the proponents say that this would be valuable to add a permanent restroom facility to Bear Cove Park and would be useful either on its own or if you added a picnic pavilion. But the opponents can point to how there's some variables so far to do with this project, such as whether it would receive permitting from the town boards, whether potential alterations to the restroom design in conjunction with possible other projects, such as building a pavilion, could make it difficult to know what is being considered. There's an unknown impact on the operating budget of Bear Cove Park because of the not knowing how much it would be used in a season and the uncertainties inherent in the ongoing maintenance of building another building in the town. As you know, it's adding a building to the town's inventory of buildings, and then the town would be responsible for upkeep and its maintenance going into the future. So that's all that I have to say, and I would welcome questions that could be directed to me or Claudia, JR. We have Larry Lindner and Charlie Byrne from the CPC on the call as well. So
welcome members of the Bear Cove Park Committee and the CPC. Julie, I have, I think, 3 questions. One is, whether the Conservation Commission was consulted about this project and whether they've taken a position. 2 is whether there has been any commitment from the town to actually provide the $50,000 funding for a pavilion, and has any design of that pavilion been provided? I guess that's 2 questions, but my last one was really, I recall that I believe it was the National Park Service or the Department of the Interior had retained at least some restrictions or interest in the operation of Bear Cove Park. And I wondered whether they had any standards or requirements for this kind of facility.
So I can provide a little bit of an answer, but Claudia can certainly continue on for me. But the Conservation Commission was consulted in the fall for Claudia. I think that you met with Lonnie Fournier and you asked questions about the design of the flush system. And also, I think that you talked to her in conjunction with the other projects that you had in mind at the time, which was the pavilion and also the restoration work to the Green Dock House Museum. The access to the $50,000 for the pavilion, I don't know that answer. And Claudia can speak to that they had a design that for the pavilion that they brought to the CPC for consideration. So they do have a design in mind. I'm not sure if they would be going forward with that specific design. And then finally, I don't know about the National Park Service guidelines.
Claudia, do you want to weigh in on those questions at all?
Certainly. Thank you. I did speak with Lonnie, and we talked about the setback from the water, and she was fine with the project as we had presented it to the CPC. She said the next time that she needed to talk would be at the time after town meeting had approved it, so that she could see the designs and work with us. The commitment to the $50,000 from the town, on several meetings of Bear Cove Park, we asked our chairman if he could confirm that, and he did. That's the best I can offer you, because he said that the $50,000 does go to, is money from the builders of the Cove for Bear Cove Park, earmarked
Okay.
for.
My question, I think, was a little more specific as to whether the selectmen were going to commit that money to the construction of a pavilion.
Oh, okay. Well, no, it was the Bear Cove Park Committee that put a vote out to see what we would do with the $50,000. And that's how we came to the CPC. We had money to bring to the CPC's project proposal. And that included the Dock House Museum, the pavilion, and the bathroom. So that's the latest on as far as the $50,000 goes.
So you would still need to go back to the Board of Selectmen to get permission to use the $50,000 for a specific project?
I imagine we would, yes. At least a confirmation. It depends on to what extent they give our committee latitude in that respect.
And do you know the answer to the National Park Service question?
That answer comes from the town's attorney. And I would love to talk with her, but I just didn't think it was my role to talk with the town's attorney. And so I was trying to work through those people who are employed by the town to talk to the attorney. I didn't think, so I'm getting used to how things work as a volunteer. So I would love to know the answer to that. That's a question that's been raised. But as far as I heard from the last meeting in which the town's attorney was present, it looked clear that we could do something like this and that she was going to just verify that.
Okay, but that verification hasn't happened yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those were all the questions I had, Julie. Are there other members of the advisory committee that have questions at this point in time? George Danis, yeah.
So Julie and I'm just wondering what the capacity of this bathroom would be. If we're going to have a pavilion with picnic tables, there's a museum. I don't know how many visitors go into the park on a given day or weekend, but I've got a little bit of concern about the capacity of this bathroom. And as I understand it, the rainwater is collected for hand washing and gray water is used for flushing. So I'm kind of wondering if there's enough rain falling and enough hand washing and how many people we would expect to use the bathroom.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Today I talked, JR and I spoke with Green Flush to get an understanding of how the system works. The rainwater helps with the flushing, so it does not go with the hand washing. There is a tank, a 225-gallon tank of potable water is part of the system that provides water to the sink.
And how does that get filled? Is that from rainwater?
No, that's filled early on through either by delivery of water or picking or taking the tank and filling it.
Okay, because there's no water at the site, is that correct?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
This is the primary request of the rowing team, was to have water. So Bear Cove Committee is working on making that happen and working.
And do we know what the cost of the water would be?
To fill the tank? The park ranger could fill the tank. He has been doing that to water particular gardens that are being, that are donated and designed. So he has a truck. He can put the water in the truck and carry it in as part of his assignment.
And how much water is used to flush the tank?
We estimate that
1 gallon flush or 2 gallon or?
it's a quart of water per flush.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions from members of the advisory committee?
Victor.
Victor, go ahead, please.
So what alternatives in terms of using a porta potty? I mean, I noticed in Julie's comment, and I noticed, I guess, pre-pandemic, that there was a pilot project with a porta potty that got cut short by the pandemic. I mean, how was that working? Has there been thought of seeing whether that is a viable alternative?
Well, we know that porta potties work temporarily. And in fact, it's part of our policy to bring them in when there's large events. So they work temporarily. They do not work in the long term, and they're unsightly, and it's a town park. So the sense of the committee was that we should establish, a bathroom and at the central location of the park and create some sort of, dynamic around the park. And the Dockhouse Museum serves as that, as the historic building, the only building that's historic within the park that people can use and create, and it's scenic. So we thought that would be the perfect spot to put it.
So when you say that the portable solution isn't viable, I mean, I can appreciate the aesthetics. I mean, when you say it's not viable long term, what do you mean? How long is it viable for?
Well, yeah, I mean, the longest they've actually stayed, we had one that stated that was in a month during COVID when nobody was allowed to go anywhere. And then we had it removed. So it's really hard to say whether you could plant a porta potty in a park for a longer period of time and determine whether that would be sufficient for the park. I think we've evolved through this whole COVID experience The park use has never been higher. And it will change. Once there is an established bathroom, I think people will count on the fact that there is a bathroom, and the use might increase. I was thinking of that today. And the fact that the rowing team shows up every day and there's no evidence necessarily that they're using the bathroom. There's any bathroom there for them, though there's their own porta potty. So they would continue to bring their own in, I think, and we would have it for the park users.
Could I
Brenda,
follow up on one of the questions that was previously asked about use
Thanks,
Um,
JR.
and the capacity of the tank?
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
real
yeah,
quick,
go ahead.
if we were to utilize a slightly larger tank, which is an $800 additional capital expense to get an additional volume on that tank, you end up getting about 2,000 uses, a little over about 2,100 uses out of the tank before it would need to be pumped. But they also have a couple different options for the maintenance side of it. So we were kind of estimating that you might get on a reasonably busy day about 30 uses per day if it's open throughout. And based on that, you're looking at once every 2 months, plus or minus, having that pumped down if it's just a regular routine type use. But they do offer the ability to either send text messages when the tank approaches capacity, or you can have somebody routinely check it just to double check that it has not reached full capacity. We also got, Claudia reached out to a couple septic haulers, and they were looking at somewhere between 300 and 350 for pump out. She hadn't yet contacted my old provider. That was quite a bit cheaper. But if you use the higher number and you figure about 4 pump outs per year, then that's an annual budgetary hit of about $1,400. Now, I bet if you compare that to maintaining a porta potty on site, that you're going to come out either even or possibly on the plus side with that.
Thank you.
Hey, Brenda, you had a question or a comment?
The Bear Cove Park Committee, what's the source of funding? Because for a yearly maintenance cost like that, plus supplies, the article comment doesn't have any information about where your source of funding is.
We do have a budget from the town. It's the smallest budget of all town committees, I understand. And we have a Friends of Bear Cove account where people who have delighted in our park have made donations. And that has been rarely dipped into. We use it just to finish out our budget every year. If we need to, we offer yoga in the park with the money. So it's a substantial amount that the committee feels would be supportive of any additional cost of operations.
Thank you.
Kristen,
I just had a comment or a kind of a question about how much this is actually going to be open. I know that you had mentioned before that this would be the park ranger's job to clean and maintain, and it would mostly be open when he is there, which is, I think you said approximately 22 hours a week. So if that's correct, so would it really be only open that short a period?
It's a great question because the bathrooms surrounding the area, there's a Lynchfield bathroom that is, I've not seen open unless there's a football game going on. So our feeling is that we would like our users to have access to a bathroom. And so ideally what we were looking for was opening from sun up to sundown every day, because that's when the park's open. We would, however, we're concerned about the pipes freezing in December, January, and February. So we would pump it out at that point, drain the pipes and close it down and not allow anybody in there until March.
So if it was sun up to sundown every day, who would be responsible if the park ranger is not there?
That's something we're working out as a committee. We're talking about that. Definitely we'd have signs that would have a phone number for someone to call to say, it's not in great shape right now, do something about it. That sort of thing. There'd be good communication with our users.
Other questions from members of advisory committee? Would anyone from this, oh, Andy, go ahead.
I assume you would stagger the hours of the ranger such that he would open the park in the morning and this facility and then close it at night? Is that the idea?
That's been discussed and not bought into at this point, because that might be a hardship for one individual. So there's an electronic lock that you can use that actually opens at sunrise and closes at sunset that you can put on the door. That's something we're exploring.
Any other, Dave, go ahead.
Dave has a question.
Oh yeah, quick question. First, I'd like to ask that Evan get the text messages about the toilet being full, please. That's number one. Second, Claudia, I'm curious, now that the pavilion is kind of back in play, am I remembering correctly that the bathroom is modular, so it kind of gets delivered, constructed, or is it built on site?
Good question. It's modular, built in Pennsylvania. We would have to dig a hole for the vault to be put in.
Okay. I guess what I was curious about is that if the pavilion is back in play through another means or another funding source, are there any efficiencies to trying to do the pavilion and the bathroom installation construction at the same time? Or do you envision that if this is approved, that the bathroom would go forward and the track and on the pavilion would be parallel and working as quickly as that can work separately?
Well, the committee is talking about the pavilion at this point, and even if it's just the pad we put in to start, we're talking fundraising in terms of selling bricks like they did at the benches and picnic table, because many people approach us to want to remember somebody with a bench in Bear Cove, so that's a good source of funds.
But you would envision then going ahead with the bathroom straight away and you'd be a separate process for the pavilion?
Yes. Well, we are doing it coincidentally as a committee.
Okay, but you would not wait on doing the bathroom until you have the pavilion funded, or would you?
We believe the pavilion is funded if we can work within our means. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Other questions from members of advisory committee? I don't see any hands. Is there anyone from the CPC or the Bear Cove Park Committee that wants to say anything further? Larry, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay. You didn't hold up your coffee cup. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. Claudia, I was at last week's meeting where the bathroom was discussed, and I'm at tonight's meeting, and I'm reading the tea leaves, and I don't know how they're going to vote, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling AdCom behind this, and I think that would make it hard to get a yes vote at town meeting. I'm using an educated guess here. I don't know. They don't know. I mean, they know how they're each going to vote. I think if it doesn't get a yes vote at town meeting, it's going to be hard to come back to CPC again. I mean, it's doable, but it makes it complicated and messy. And what I'm hearing, and I knew it when we were deliberating it at CPC, but it's kind of getting a little solidified now, is there are things that are just not, lots of things that are not in place yet. Like okay, maybe the bathroom can be open electronically and closed electronically, but if somebody's only going to be there a few hours a day, who's going to clean it a couple of times a day, which is like what happens at the rec barn behind town hall, all kinds of questions like that. And we don't have specific, you say that there's a, donations are given and there's a budget, but we don't have specifics on how much money would go toward taking care of the bathroom. And I think a bathroom there is a good idea, but there's a lot of cogs in the wheel that aren't kind of sealed in yet, including the thing that's come up is that the money might be there for a pavilion, but I think what I'm hearing from AdCom is the Bear Cove Park Committee can't decide to use that money for a pavilion without permission, which they don't know they're going to get. That's what I think I'm hearing. So which is a very long way of saying, might you want to consider withdrawing this ask this year and coming back when things are more nailed down about what the plan would be to run the bathroom, pay for the bathroom, staff the bathroom, and put the collateral around it, the picnic table, the pavilion, et cetera, get the permission for the pavilion money and all of that. It's obviously not what you want to hear, but I'm throwing it out to you as a possibility.
Thank you.
So that's my question. Might you consider withdrawing the ask this year and coming back when AdCom, it sounds to me like they would feel better about getting behind it.
I guess I wasn't privy to the conversation that happened last week. So.
Well, I did give you an update about how a lot of questions were raised at our meeting last week, Claudia, and raised some concerns that were raised at the meeting. So,
Well, in fairness to Claudia, she probably, as one person on a committee, is not in a position to make any decision tonight without consultation of her committee. And so I don't know that we can have a subsidiary meeting of the Bear Cove Park Committee tonight as well. But you know, I want to say, you know, as somebody formerly involved with CPC, I really appreciate all the work that you and your committee have put into this. I do think there are unanswered questions, and I do think it may be better to consider this collectively with a pavilion project, whether it's funded by CPC or by the $50,000, with perhaps a more developed plan next year. But as the chair of the AdCom, I don't vote unless it's to create a tie or break a tie. So that's probably the last thing you'll be hearing from me tonight. Is there anyone else that wants to weigh in at this point? Any member of the public or?
Evans.
Evans got his hand up.
Yeah, Bob, I was just going to ask, we have a lot on our agenda. If we could either choose to, vote on this or move along, it would be great.
Well, thanks. My not hearing any other public comment, I was going to ask Julie if she had a recommendation. And then I was going to ask if there's any further discussion among the AdCom. And if not, we'll vote it.
well, I can read the recommendation, which is the original question, and then we can vote and see how people feel about whether they vote for the recommended motion or not. Is that what you'd like, Bob?
Well, I think you as the liaison, would like to hear your recommendation.
Okay.
Libby, do you have a question before we vote or before Julie reads it?
I was just gonna say, do we feel it's appropriate to allow CPC to meet and come back to us with a recommendation as to whether they want to go forward with an AdCom vote on this article, or rather they would prefer to withdraw it? Because I think that's a separate discussion that has to happen that I feel like the full CPC isn't really here and in a position to make that call.
Well, the CPC wouldn't ordinarily revote something that has already been presented to the selectmen and actually approved by the selectmen. I mean, that kind of puts the whole process back in January. So did you want to say something, Larry?
Yeah, if I could ask one follow-up question. No matter how AdCom votes tonight, if the Bear Cove Park Committee met again after tonight and decided to withdraw its ask for this year, would it be too late to say that in the comments section of the warrant? Like, what is their deadline for changing their mind?
Well, let me say this, and I have Evan's comment in mind, and we have some other major things tonight. Either the advisory committee is going to vote to affirmatively support this project, or it would presumably vote no action, and in conjunction with a no action vote could recognize the merits of the project and welcome its return next year. I think those are ultimately going to be our options.
But does Bear Cove Park Committee have an option to withdraw the ask after you vote tonight?
Well, for example, if there is a no action vote, and I don't want to prejudge anybody's mind on this, I don't really know how people are going to vote. And they then wanted to withdraw this part of the article. I think it would be possible to do that. Similarly, on the other side of the coin, if there were a no action vote and they wanted to make their own affirmative motion at town meeting and say, look, the selectmen supported us, the CPC supported, we want you, town, to vote on this. And then the town would vote it up or down.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Enough parliamentary.
Yeah. I just wanted Claudia to know she has options.
Yes. Yes. The town meeting is ultimately the legislature, not us. We only make recommendations. So Julie, back to you.
Okay, my recommended motion is that the town appropriate a sum of money in the amount of $67,800 from the Community Preservation General Fund to be used by the Bear Cove Park Committee to build a bathroom in Bear Cove Park located at 0 Fort Hill Street, map 77, parcel 1.
Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, Andy.
I just want to say that I walk quite a bit down at Nantasket Beach, and I'm very happy when the bathroom there is open. And I think this can be done as a two-step project. There are a lot of users of Bear Cove who could use the bathroom now, and when the picnickers come in who want to use a pavilion later, that's fine, but I see these as separate projects.
Any further discussion? If not, then we come to vote, and we vote by roll call. And Claudia, I'm just calling people's
Victor has
names.
his hand up, Bob.
Who has his?
Bob,
Oh, sorry, Victor. I'm trying, if people would use the raise hand function on Zoom, it makes it easier for me to see you than to.
I did.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Just, I mean, bearing in mind the time, I just want to say that I think that the biggest concern here is perhaps the ongoing operations. I think the permitting is not an issue at this point. Any project would have to go through permitting, and that's not unusual. I'm comfortable that the operations can be worked out, and if they're not, the project won't go ahead. So I'd be inclined to vote for this. I think it is very important to have a bathroom there.
Any further discussion? If not, we come to vote. And Claudia, I'm just calling people's names as they appear on my screen. I don't have any preordained order. So George,
No action.
Brenda,
Aye.
Tina,
No action.
Kristen,
No action.
Julie,
No action.
Dave,
Aye.
Nancy,
No action.
Al,
No action.
Victor,
Aye.
Andy,
Aye.
Daveline,
No action.
Libby,
No action.
Evan.
Oh,
You're
sorry,
on.
no action, Bob.
Erin,
No action.
I'm sorry, I missed Evan. What did he get?
No action.
All right, thank you.
I've got 10-4 in favor of no action.
That's what I got.
And for anyone that voted aye, do you want to be recorded in opposition to the no action vote?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I'm afraid I don't know what that means.
All right. If it's an AdCom procedure that if you want to speak in opposition to the majority position taken by the advisory committee at town meeting, that we ask that you be recorded in opposition. And that will be reflected on the WAS, the Warrant Articles Status Summary, and that preserves your right to speak at town meeting. And ordinarily, at town meeting, and of course, there may become an affirmative motion by the Bear Cove Park Committee, but the majority of the advisory would speak, and ordinarily a minority representative would be chosen to speak as well.
Thank you.
So I'm forgetting, you were one of the ayes, Brenda?
Yes, so no, thank you for the being recorded in opposition.
It doesn't hurt to be recorded in opposition. It preserves your options.
Fair enough.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, JR. Thank you, other members. Larry, for being
Thank you,
here.
Claudia.
And we will see what the legislature does. Okay. And so we will go on with our agenda. I see that Eric Valentine is here. I see that Libby has returned, which tells me that the selectmen have finished with the hearing on capital outlay. And we indicated, since that was involving personal presentations on our agenda, that we would take that up when Eric and Libby, and I think Daveline might have absented herself for a moment, arrived. So Libby, I will turn the floor over to you to introduce the article. Welcome, Eric. Good to see you back.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at the list here to see if we have anybody else from Capital, but just want to introduce you to Eric Valentine. He's been here, I think this is Eric, is it your third year as chair?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Third year as chair of Capital Outlay. And we also have members Matt Goulet, who I'm not sure if he's here, and Kevin Flaherty. And Dave Lean and myself are the liaisons to Capital. And I would just say we're really lucky to have a great committee. And particularly Eric and Matt are strong financial people. And Eric being a CPA, Matt is a chartered financial analyst at Fidelity. So I'm just going to introduce Eric and let him present the budget, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Libby. Okay, so
Eric,
I'll,
do you want to share a screen and put your capital plan up in front of everybody, or?
Sure. Why don't I just, I'll provide a summary of kind of our annual process and some high-level metrics, and then I can share the detailed plan that we can review in detail, just to keep people's focus. That's okay.
Great, thank you.
So annually, we receive all the capital requests from each department, and we will meet with those respective departments to discuss their capital requests in detail, to understand the nature of the need, the priority, and the basis of the request. We have a pre-established criteria that we prioritize all the requests that we receive, and each year we try and fund all the annual requests and priority one requests. For those of you that aren't familiar, an annual request is something that we receive every single year, and priority one is deemed to be for an item that's either broken, core to the department's mission, or not replacing it would be a safety risk. We also consider the department's priority of the requested items, as well as the impacts of deferring items to the out years, as we don't want to have any kind of bottlenecks in one year that would be difficult to fund in the future. Some specific metrics for fiscal 22. The overall request received to be funded from the tax levy was 4.8 million. We narrowed that down and are recommending 2.6 million be funded of the capital request be funded in line with the projected capital budget. Of the 2.6 million, we're recommending a little over 800K are annual requests, and a little under 1.8 million are priority one requests. Specific to the school department, we received 2.2 million of capital requests this year, and we're recommending funding a little under 1 million. From an overall perspective, we're recommending the capital requests 2.6 million be funded from the tax levy, approximately 40,000 be funded from the municipal waterways fund for the harbor master's request, and a little over 3.3 million to be funded from user rates and fees for the country club, the rec department, the sewer department, and the water company's capital requests. So now
Sorry, Eric, can you repeat the second one? It was 2.6 million from the tax levy, and then what was the next one?
it was a little over 40,000 for the to be funded from the municipal waterways fund, which is for the harbor master's requests.
Nancy, those are all on the last page of the capital plan that I distributed late this afternoon.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's all right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, but you're on.
Yes.
Yep.
So yeah, this is what I just summarized here. So if you'd like me to get into more detail on the specifics around each department, I definitely can do that. Unless you'd like to ask specific questions, we can discuss as well.
Eric, you may want to, Bob, it may be a good time now because everybody has seen the latest forecast with the additional $500,000 that was added in there. And Eric, do you want to just address what Mary Power, the chair of Selectmen, mentioned at the last presentation, or would you like me to, just as far as where that stands?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I can give it a shot, and then you can fill in any blanks. So Mary informed us that we may receive an additional 500K of funding for fiscal 22 for capital items, which I guess some things need to be ironed out first, which she should, inform whether or not we will get this funding or not for fiscal 22 in the next week or week and a half.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think she did seem to connect that to if there's a potential override.
Override. Okay.
So I think that at this point, we went forward with what we projected because we don't know what's going to happen in the next week or two. So at this point, the amount you're seeing is the original budget as given to capital. And if in fact there's any additional funding, then Eric will come back and let you all know what the Capital Outlay Committee has made in additional recommendations.
Libby, did the selectmen vote this plan tonight?
No, they did not. It was, I think typically they don't, and nor does AdCom on the night of the presentation. It's usually presented and then voted once the forecast gets a little more firmed up.
Okay, and did the selectmen indicate they were going to defer a vote until the 500,000 was firmed up or not?
They did not link deferring the vote to the 500. I would just say the normal course of business is just as we hear all budgets, we hear them and then all the votes happen later. So what they did tonight was in no way linked to any potential additional funds is in the normal course of how they hear and vote on capital.
Okay. Well, Eric, if you think there are things that were unusual or should be drawn in particular to the attention of members of the advisory committee, I think you could address those rather than just going through every line item. And then to the extent advisory committee members had questions, they could ask those.
Okay, sounds good. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's unusual, but it's the largest item that we're recommending funding for this year is $404,000 ambulance for the fire department. This was deferred last year, and it's a critical item for the fire department to have as the one it'll be replacing would be put into reserve, and the reserve one, I guess, is on its last legs at the end, at the end of its life.
Eric, do you want to just mention what the chief said since he happened to be on the selectmen meeting, just for the benefit of AdCom and obviously this item we did defer it last year, so now we're in the year where we really should fund it. But I think what the chief mentioned just briefly was very informative.
Was that in terms of the reserve and the
Yeah, in terms of the fact that they really like having 2 reserve ambulances, and this will allow them to, when they get a new frontline, take the oldest and just really retire it and trade it in, or they haven't determined if they're going to sell it or trade it in. But I think it was just important that this was deferred last year, and there was kind of an unwritten sense that we would really do our best to fund it this year.
right? The chief's ideal situation is to have 2 frontline ambulances and 2 reserve ambulances, and each frontline ambulance would be active frontline duty for 4 years and then in reserve for 4 years. But that would require us to fund a new ambulance every 2 years, and we just don't have the funding sources right now to do that. So the front lines, I think, are closer to 6 years, and then the reserve, I think, is 4 or 6 years, depending upon the current state of each ambulance. And so the frontline ones are obviously for the first 2 calls, but sometimes they get 3 or 4 calls and they need the reserve ambulances, or one is in the shop and they need the reserve units. I think it was Mary that made it clear that by no means deferring it last year did it risk not responding to every single call, because I guess there's the South Shore Consortium where we can call other towns to respond to calls, you know, in a dire situation.
I think it's also
Okay,
good
can I
to
ask
note
you a quick
the
question?
ambulance generates revenue for the town as well.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Hey, Eric, this is Dave Anderson. I'm just curious on the PRS window. I read the footnote and I see the 4.2 million. Do you know the vintage of that estimate, like when that was compiled and what it was based on?
I think it was, yeah, we talked to John Ferris about that, and it was his kind of average of other schools that received the MSA's, was it the
Yeah.
MSBA funding, and so it's I wouldn't say it's concrete by any means, but it was, you know, based on other schools that had similar work done and their actual costs. And Libby, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he said there are some schools where it was, you know, relatively low, and then some that were significantly higher, and so he kind of just took an average of them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Dave's got that warrant article, so we know why you're asking, right, Dave? I mean,
I'm just interested. I'm curious. That's
yeah, and I think often the estimates we get are very much estimates from the school department. So I would just say that once that's firmed up, we'll roll that number that you eventually get into our plan here.
Oh yeah, no, I was literally just wondering
Yeah.
where John came up with it, because the other night he sounded super non-committal to any numbers. Sue, this may be a question for you, or maybe it is for Eric and Libby. When we do get the number, let's make it up. Let's say it's $5 million total cost. Will this budget and spreadsheet reflect the 5 million or the 5 million net of MSBA? Or, I mean, is it the gross cost of this project, and then we'll have the offsets for MSBA and Bear Cove elsewhere, or whatever it is, Avalon, Broadstone? Or is it, or does this budget show the net amount that only that the town pays?
So our plan would be to show the gross amount and then include in the footnote the, you know, alternate funding sources.
Got it. Okay,
And
great.
Dave, I thought I heard at the selectmen meeting the other night, and maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that I think MSBA requires that the article have the full amount.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, Bob, yes.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. We have to budget the full amount, and I think we actually have to pay it, and then we get reimbursed.
State's no dummy.
Were there other
Checks in the mail,
highlights?
Dave.
Yep, not these days.
Were there other highlights, Eric, that you wanted to bring to our attention?
I mean, one unique item was the school was requesting 105,000 to purchase 3 school buses off the 5-year lease that's expiring soon, and that would, that was, the plan was to purchase some of the lighter used buses off the from the lease, to support, I guess, additional needs and as backups. And I think the plan was to lease fewer overall buses in the new 5-year lease, but I think that was kind of to be determined.
Okay.
And then just one other item from an overall COVID kind of impact, for fiscal 22, there wasn't any direct impacts. I just would like to highlight that the school has included in the technology line items here that I'm highlighting in fiscal 25 and 26. I guess it's just this baseline technology. They included the cost to replace all the additional technology, computers, iPads, whatever it was that was funded through the CARES Act. And so I just wanted to highlight, I'm not sure that, the town wants to take on that, annual, or not annual, but, increase to the, overall capital spend for these, additional technology items.
And that's for fiscal 25 and 26.
Yeah.
That just reflect the refreshing of the equipment that they've purchased in the last year under CARES Act. So Eric's just pointing out whether that's going to become part of our total base inventory for the schools or not is something that will have to be determined in those out years.
Other highlights from you, Eric, or shall I invite questions?
Eric, what about the SAN network for IT?
Oh, yeah, we're recommending funding 125,000 for, the replacement and upgrade of the storage area network for the town. And I guess, the current one is close to its end of life, as well as there's additional, demands from the town with, more stuff moving online, as well as, the virtual demands of the, post-COVID operations.
And that's been on the capital plan for a few years now, and we were hoping that could get completed before Steve Becker retired, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But they're really right up against the storage right now, and storing all these Zoom meetings is just adding, some additional requirements on the network. Although actually, I think the Zooms are stored on the cloud, but they're up against their storage anyway. So that's one of those must-haves.
And then I guess finally, just from an overall funding perspective, the additional potential 500K would be great this year, and it could go a long way with funding some of the items that we had to defer. But the, kind of the cadence that we've been under, where we get an extra 100K of funding each year. And, in my tenure of, 4 years, we haven't always gotten the 100K. So I just wanted to highlight that, this kind of process is, in my view, is not really sustainable. There's a lot of big ticket items out there in the, in the out years or the backlog. There's a couple of large fire engines that, are 600 and 700K. There's, and granted, maybe these are funded by warrant articles. But just from an overall perspective, the kind of the out years, the out kind of 4 years that I, kind of view as a backlog in fiscal 19 was, a little under 15 million. And then in fiscal 22, it's increased to 20, or no, sorry. This is just from the tax levy, just to narrow on that. It's 25.4 million. So just in 3 years, it's increased 10 million. Granted, we've been more diligent of trying to include and increase the accuracy of the capital budgeted items in the out years. But just wanted to highlight that there's increasing demands for capital funding in the current 2.6 from the tax levy, or 2.6 this year, and then increasing 100K each year isn't going to be enough to fund all these requests.
And Bob, just two quick things to mention, to pick up what Eric said is, we know on some of these out years, there's some large things that, may end up being potential warrant articles, or maybe they, for whatever reason, they'll be done piecemeal, but that's one consideration. I just want to point out also that Mary Power did bring up a point that, if you guys all recall, that there was the Harvard interns who came and did a kind of a overall look at how we do our capital planning and how that compares to some of our benchmark communities. And one of the things that she did make mention to maybe on this off season is that some of those benchmark communities, actually the Capital Outlay Committee, or whatever their corresponding name for it is, actually I believe have the capability to make some recommendations that will actually come from borrowing in addition to the levy. And I think, if memory serves from reading that report, it wasn't something necessarily that was, well, I guess it would have to go to a warrant article ultimately, because it has to be approved by town meeting by 2/3 of its borrowing. But that was just something Mary mentioned, something for us to consider in the off season this year, given the fact that certainly our out year requirements are getting larger. So I would just end it with that, because that was something that kind of did also come up at the selectmen meeting.
Okay. Is it time to open the floor for questions?
Sure.
I know, Al McDonald, you had your hand up a moment ago. Have you answered your own question or do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I guess I figured I could figure it out on my own, but it was on the use of the levy. I was wondering which way is the outlier. That is 22 abnormally low because of the use of the MSBA money, or are the next 3 years abnormally high for use of levy? As the source.
Yeah, the next 3 years are abnormally high. There's, I believe in fiscal 24, well, in fiscal 24, there's 1.5 million for the South Elementary roof replacement, which would most definitely require a warrant article. The high school has 2.3 in fiscal 25 for a replacement of the boiler. They also have, 600K for turf field replacements in fiscal 23. So there's, I guess, some big ticket items that are increasing those fiscal year tax levy items, as well as, in the beginning of fiscal 22, the funding request, the capital requests that, were to be funded from the tax levy was 4.8 million that we had to reduce and defer items to get down to this 2.6 projected funding. And so, if everything stays the same next year, fiscal 23, we have 7.9 million of requests from the tax levy. We're going to have to defer all the items, items to get down to 2.7 if all things stay the same and we get an additional 100K of funding.
Or Eric, I would add that of that 7.8 million from the levy in fiscal 23, that some of that may be deemed to be a warrant article. So
Right.
then you'd see that down below under the other category, and then it would ultimately be the vote of town meeting as to whether that project moved forward or not. So we're showing it all from the levy, but we know in Capital that as each out year goes, they get a little fuzzier and fuzzier. So, we know we can count on the current year, but there's always some fluidity in the out years.
I have a question from Andy and then George.
With regard to the school budget, I'm looking at a capital projects budget from the school from February 8th. If I'm reading it correctly, the grand total for fiscal 22 was 6.4 million, less 4.1 would be the reimbursement for the windows, the Plymouth River School, leaving an operating capital of 2.2. But yet, if I heard you correctly, your school budget is 2.6?
No, the overall tax levy funding capital items is 2.6. Specific to the school, the 2.2 million is what they requested. And we're recommending funding a little under a million, or it's like 956,000.
Oh, okay, that's where I misunderstood it. And one other question, their budget had technology capital request baseline 250, pardon me, 250,780, but in your budget that is 265,560.
Yep. Yeah. So that's.
Do you know what the difference is?
Yeah. So sorry. When did you say your budget is from?
February 8th.
February 8th. Okay. Yeah. So, well, yeah, we met with the school on January 20th, but the budget that we went through with them, the technology line items didn't tie to the underlying support, and so they were updated subsequently after the meeting. Our numbers are based on, Let me pull it up here.
And I would also just add, Andy, I mean, they have their own subcommittee, the school committee, that's a capital committee. So then they have their separate meetings, but we just know that this is the final number that they submitted to capital. And actually there's a sheet that Eric's showing you on the screen.
Yep. Okay, tell me what I'm looking at.
So this is the underlying support for our number, the 265,560.
Okay.
And so this, I think what was your number?
The number above it.
Oh, your number was 250?
250, yeah.
So yeah, in the original file that they sent us, this 15,000 for the core switch wasn't included in the summation formula.
I see. Okay. So that would explain the difference. Now, the school budget also contains instructional, as an operating budget item, 1.2 in instructional technology. Do you know how they draw the line between instructional technology and an operating budget and the technology and the capital?
I guess it's kind of gray. We've actually discussed having, some of these recurring like Chromebooks be funded through the operating budget, but when if you take from one, how do you fund it from the other? Type problem. So the capital items that we funded are typically servers, computers, I guess switches, printers, those type of kind of core technology items. I'm not sure what's in this 1.2.
Yeah.
If it's software or I don't know, user licenses or.
Dave Anderson, do you know what the difference is?
I don't.
And the transportation line item in the operating expenses is 1.289. I take it that does not include the Dave, do we know what that budget is? It would not include the new buses or the new van, I gather.
No.
I don't know off the top of my head. We could dig around.
Andy, it would not, because these are capital, the buses, the van, and what you're looking at is on the operating budget.
Yeah, I guess, I guess I'm confused because at one point, put the transportation aside for a minute, but I know that the school folks have talked about moving the technology budget from capital to operating. And so that kind of confuses me as to, in the transition period, what goes where. But I can find out more information on that. But that's good.
At least from our discussions with the school, my understanding was that these two technology line items would move to the operating budget in their plan or future structure. But my understanding is that they would still expect in this year the 432K for funding this technology stuff would be used to fund other school stuff.
You all set, Andy?
Yeah.
Okay, George, why don't you go ahead?
Bob. So Eric, and Libby, I'm just curious if we know how our capital budget compares to our benchmark communities, and if there's any basis for how much is given to capital outlay year by year.
I'm not sure how we compare to other benchmark benchmark communities.
Yeah, I
well,
don't know either, Eric. I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think we have any idea. I think, was that Harvard intern study, was that more of a process study? I don't think that was based on dollar amounts, right?
I think they might have had something.
So I think we'd have to go back and look at that, George, but we don't really have any answer to that right now.
It just sounds, from what Eric was saying about the buildup, the last 2 years, we've gone from a backlog of 15 million to $25 million. And, seems as though our capital budget might be a little bit on the light side.
It is.
That's all I have, Bob.
But well, I mean, as far as the basis for the, the 2.6 from the tax levy, so per the finance policy, 2 to 5% of the operating budget should be used to fund capital, expenditures.
Okay.
And so we've the last at least the last 5 years we've been within that policy. Granted, we're at the low end, we're in the twos. I think for this year we're projected around 2.75%. But as far as overall spending compared to the benchmark communities, that's actually a good question. I'm not sure how we compare.
All right. Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other members of the advisory committee that have questions tonight?
Sorry, I was actually able to pull up this Harvard presentation. So here, let me share my screen. So this is.
You're good, Eric. Boy.
This is a 2.1 million for Hingham in the red here, and then we have a high of Needham of 6.25 and a low of Sudbury of 0.6 million or 600,000.
There you go, George. Ask and ye shall receive.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there other members of the advisory committee that have any questions? Well, unless there are any parting words, Eric, thanks for being here. Thank you, Libby and Daveline, for all the many meetings you've attended and contributed to this year on Capital. We will not be voting tonight. We will await future events. People can study this capital plan, and we will probably have an opportunity for additional discussion as the process proceeds.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time,
Thank
Bob,
you.
and thanks for the
Thanks
committee's
very
time.
much.
And I'd like to thank Libby and Daveline for their support. It's very helpful having the advisory committee representation on the capital committee.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Eric.
Eric. Great job.
All right, have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So that then brings us back to our ongoing discussion of tax consequences, overrides, debt exclusions, and the forecast sensitivity tool. And Dave, in his few spare minutes when he's not attending school committee meetings and school subcommittee meetings, has put together another presentation for us tonight. So I will turn the floor over to you, Dave.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks. Can you guys see my screen there?
Yes.
Okay, so this presentation kind of just came out of a question I started asking myself as I looked at the spreadsheet that we'll talk about tonight, which relates to the tax impact of overrides, operational overrides, and excluded debt overrides. And I wanted to try to understand better the context for tax rates in Hingham as compared to some of our peer towns, since we like to compare ourselves on those peer town metrics. So what we have here is kind of a work in progress, to be fair. As you can imagine, it's kind of a complicated process all around. But I did just want to kind of take a look at the relative tax burden in Hingham compared to some of our other peer communities. And so the slides that I'm going to show you tonight come mostly with data from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, some from the Census Bureau, and that's all accessible. You guys can all take a look at it. I'm happy to share my worksheet with you if anybody wants to dig a little bit deeper. You'll see that I've overlaid then some of the scenarios, or I've made up some scenarios to overlay into the relative tax burden graphs just to kind of show where they would fall. But it's important, I think, to recognize, obviously, there's a lot of assumptions underlying this. And also, I think important to consider is that what you're seeing is basically a snapshot of FY21, in most cases, tax rates. And so that is basically a pre-COVID tax rate. So to the extent that other communities might be considering an override of some kind, obviously that wouldn't be reflected in their FY21, let me just say, an override related to COVID or COVID remediation or COVID recovery, et cetera, that wouldn't be reflected in this. At the very end of this presentation, which you have, if you looked at it earlier today, you'll see a bunch of slides, which are screenshots from the town financial model, which we'll dig into just briefly at the end of this meeting, and people can see where, kind of look under the hood on some of this analysis. So for people that were on AdCom a year ago, this is a slide from a presentation that Mary gave us, just kind of level setting, I think, for people who I imagine on AdCom are mostly familiar with the fact that unlike some of our peer communities, Hingham is largely funded through a residential tax levy. As you can see, almost 89% of the tax levy comes out of the residential tax base. So obviously that cuts in a number of ways. Number one, I think residential homeowners will bear the brunt of property tax increases. And conversely, when we talk about finding more revenue, when you only have, give or take 10% or a little more of your tax base coming from the commercial side, even though we have the same tax rate for residential and commercial, you can imagine the math such that you would really have to move the commercial rates significantly higher to add any real thrust to the overall town revenue when they currently make up just a little bit more than 10% of the tax base. So here's a graph that just shows you historically, as it says in the title there, the Hingham average tax bill as a percent of Hingham income per capita. So let me unpack that a little bit, because there's a couple things in there that aren't that familiar or weren't familiar to me. This is straight out of the Department of Revenue, Massachusetts Department of Revenue website, where they have a lot of easy ways to gather data about any municipality in Hingham or in Massachusetts that you want to. And they interestingly use an income per capita measurement. And so for anybody who's an economist or social scientist on board, that's probably not the first thing that would leap to your mind. I think most people, including myself, thought more of a household income calculation, but I reached out to the Department of Revenue and they said that based on how they collect their data and where they get their data, it's just easier for them to put their hands on income per capita as opposed to trying to get the household income, which really comes from the Census Bureau, since it's a household is a little bit different calculation. So what Hingham income per capita means is basically you sum up all of the adjusted gross income from every tax return that gets submitted to the Massachusetts Department of Revenue from the town of Hingham, and you divide that number by the number of residents of Hingham of any age. So just like it says, income per capita. Now, I can show you income per capita because the Department of Revenue uses this measure. They use it for every community. So we can look at income per capita across all municipalities, and I will in a later slide. But this just shows you, in general, the Hingham average tax bill. When I say average tax bill, that is going to be the tax bill on the average assessed value home, which is, as you'll recall from last week, or I don't know, maybe it was just another meeting I was in and nobody else is about $875,000 is the current average assessed value of a home in Hingham. So when you look at this carefully, you'll see the 2013 and 2020 have what seem to be kind of spikes, which makes you wonder what happened there. When you look at the data underlying it, it's actually kind of a wrinkle or a blip in the per capita income, not in the tax rate. So the tax rate didn't necessarily jump in 2013 and then fall back down in 2014. And I can't explain exactly why the income bumped like it did, but I just told you how they calculated it, and that's the best I can do at this point. Here is the data that underlies that, and you can just see if you look closely here. Here's 2013. Oh, that's not very helpful. No, it's worse. All right, 64,000. 70 the year before, 74 the year after. I honestly don't know what is going on there, but like I said, it's coming straight from the Department of Revenue, and so I guess we'll take the good with the bad in terms of the data reporting. So moving into the model that I'll refer to as the town financial model. It's the model people may have also heard of as being created by John Asher with help from Jim Taylor, who were both two wonderful people, both two former AdCom chairs and two folks with super strong finance backgrounds who've been deeply involved in this work. So we can come back to this, but let me just walk you through what we're looking at here. This is just kind of giving you some baseline data against which we're going to compare Hingham to other communities. So the average single family assessed value I just mentioned is about $877,000. That's the Department of Revenue stat. The average single family tax bill from the Department of Revenue is about $10,000 in 2021 was about $10,355. That excludes the CPA, Community Preservation Act, 1.5% surcharge. And it's better to exclude it at this point because I haven't gone through the work to see which of our peer communities charge it and which ones don't. So this way we can make sure we're looking across the board at non-CPA affected tax bills. So just quickly there, you'll see that 1.18% of the assessed value was the single family tax bill in this last year. The DOR income per capita for Hingham was about $118,000 in 2021. Now the median household income, which is calculated from the Census Bureau, and this I think is an average. Well, it is an average from 2015 to 2019 of the median household income. For your statisticians, you get to use the mean and median in same sentence there. And that is in 2019 dollars. So there is a lot of economics underlying that stat. But suffice it to say, it won't surprise people that there are fewer households in Hingham than there are people. So the number is larger. And I will show you a comparison of both median household income and per capita income as we go forward. So the model, what I modeled here just for argument's sake, and this is not to suggest a path as to which override is appropriate or not appropriate, but just to give you a rough idea, to orient you on this slide. On the left-hand column there, under FY 2022 operating override amount, there are 4 cases there from $1 million, $2.5 million, $5 million, and $10 million of an override in 2022. Moving one column to the right, that is the output from the town financial model. And when we get to the model, that you can track that back to cell D24 on the dashboard tab. And you can see, thankfully, that the numbers are consistent. It's a linear function, basically, and that the $10 million cost is roughly double that of a $5 million cost. When we get into the model, I'll explain to you what exactly those numbers are, because the actual number and the cost of an assessment, I'll get there, forget it, we'll wait on that one. Next column is the 10,355, which we just saw on the previous page. That was the average tax bill for 2021. So if we sum the first column and the second column and the third column, we get the fourth column, which is kind of the after override tax bill, if you will, or the tax bill including the override. And then as we go to the right, you'll see basically dividing that bill by, in the first case, by assessed value to get a tax rate. Then in the green column there, dividing it by the income per capita, and in the final column, dividing it by the household income, as we talked about. I'll show you a graphical representation of this too, so you don't have to memorize those numbers. At the bottom of the page, I then took the scenario one step further and imagined a $10 million operating override and a $100 million excluded debt override in 2025, which is, again, that 100 million is the number people have been kind of using as a working number for public safety facility, foster, and other capital needs as we have going forward. So if one was to add to the 11,637, the cost, the average, again, this is the average annual cost of that $100 million excluded debt override, you'd get to a grand total tax bill with a $10 million operating override, $100 million excluded debt override of about $12,502. And again, I show that in those three scenarios to the right. So here now, actually, I'm going to skip this, forgive me, because the next one shows almost the same thing. This is now the average tax bill as a percent of assessed value. So basically saying if your house is worth X, divide your tax bill by X, and you see what percent of your assessed value you are paying in property taxes. It looks like the default setting is exactly the same as used in the Harvard study here, where Hingham goes red. The other ones are blue. What you see in the striped columns is the scenarios I just laid out for you. So kind of working, if you, maybe a little bit easier to work right to left, you'll see Braintree at roughly 1% of the average assessed value for their tax bill. This is residential tax bill. And you'll recall that if you look back, Braintree has a higher percentage of commercial revenue than we do, but then Marblehead does not. So there's a lot to unpack if somebody wants to in terms of what really leads to these differences. But then you get to Weymouth and Wellesley, and then Hingham as we stand today at about 1.18. And then you'll see the next two striped columns, the impact of a $1 million and then a $2.5 million override. Then Canton slides in there, and then Hingham at a $5 million override, and then so forth as you move to the left. And you'll see then at the far left striped column, that is a $10 million operational override and $100 million excluded debt override in 2025. Now, there is some nuance here as it relates to the calculation of assessed value, which if anybody really wants to dig into it or wants to ask further questions, we can talk about it offline. I won't drag everybody through it. I think it's important to point out too, though, again, just as a reminder, that all of these scenarios for Hingham at least understate the tax burden to the extent of the CPA surcharge, because I have excluded that. And if anybody knows off the top of the head which of these other communities charges CPA, shoot me an email and then we can maybe try to adjust for that. But this is a non-CPA metric across the board. Any questions about this slide before I move on?
Dave, just about the CPA.
Yeah.
The surcharge can vary from community to community to community.
Oh, okay. So it's even more complicated than
So
yes or no.
Hingham, for example, could charge up to 3% if the voters approve that, but it has elected only to do a percentage and a half. So
okay,
I think that's a lot of going down into rabbit holes to figure that one out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bob. Thank you. You saved me at least one rabbit hole. You owe me for a couple others, but I'll give you a break on that one.
Dave, do you note on one of the slides or somewhere in here how the operational override would be a permanent increase and the excluded debt would be just probably 20-year debt? It may just be important to note somewhere for someone that it's, there is a distinction between the two.
Yes, consider it noted. And yes, I can put that in here as well. Aaron.
First of all, this is fantastic. It took me a minute to kind of consume what it was you were presenting. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. We are in fact looking at what we anticipate or possible scenarios of future years to what is a current year tax levy for other communities, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So if your question is, well, so yes, the reason I bring that up, and maybe the reason you're bringing it up, is that if any of these communities was to make a similar adjustment to their levy, to COVID, that would have to be added. So we're kind of hanging the cost on Hingham if we were to go this way against communities that, as far as I know, may have had overrides in the past, but have certainly not had a COVID-related override in this current situation.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right, let me move on then, and we can always circle back to some of these if people want to. So this is, just to give you guys some framework then, this is median household income. And did I skip a page? Hold on one second. I know. Okay, so this is gonna, I'm now just gonna show you the 2 slides. This is median household income. So again, this comes from the Census Bureau, not from the Department of Revenue. You can see Hingham comfortably where we like to be in the middle of our peer groups. Now, interestingly, this is the chart of average tax bill as a percent of median household income. So again, these are all worth just kind of thinking about after the fact. It's a lot of information to take in all at once, and it's interesting to compare slide over slide, but I don't think there's a lot of magic here. The pattern is similar. Hingham in the red, scenarios, the same scenarios in the stripes. Again, compared against, well, I pulled the Census Bureau data for the other communities to compare apples to apples in terms of median household income. So same data for all communities as the denominator of this calculation. Now, this is the per capita income calculation, which is remarkable, if you ask me. But it is what it is. This comes from the Department of Revenue. This, again, is a total adjusted gross income for these communities divided by the number of residents in the communities. So it is, in fact, true that Weston's per capita income over a 10-year average, mind you, is 3 times that of Hingham's, if you can imagine that. Now, what I don't know about the underlying stats, which any good statistics person would tell you, is that it would be interesting to see the distribution. Obviously, if you have one person making extraordinary amounts of money, it can move the needle, I imagine, over some population base. But needless to say, Weston and Wellesley, I think, stick out a little bit as somewhat of outliers in this chart, and that will be represented here when you see to the far right here, again, the average tax bill as a percent of the Department of Revenue's municipality income per capita as opposed to household income. And no surprise, you see Weston and Wellesley on the far right. In Weston, almost a fraction, almost half of what the balance of the Massachusetts communities in this subset includes. So again, same pattern, red, same stripes for the scenarios, same scenarios. All right, so that brings me to the backup data, which is really a segue into talking a little bit about the financial model. So if anybody found the financial sensitivity analysis model that we looked at last week to be a little bit overwhelming, this one will absolutely knock you over. And it's because it's super detailed that it's super, I think, powerful and probably extremely precise. But let me just kind of orient you a little bit to what you're about to see on the model. So the model itself is, if you don't have it, we'll get it out to you. I think the selectmen are getting a tour of it tonight by its authors. But in a nutshell, what it does at a very granular level, but then rolls it up to an accessible level, is to allow you, and I'll show you this page, this is just a screenshot, but basically what it allows you to do in this column here on the left-hand side to enter any excluded debt amount that you wanted to have. So an example, in my earlier scenario, I added, I'll show you in that one actually. So here's the scenario where kind of the most punitive scenario, at least of the ones that I chose, where you have $100 million excluded debt override in 2025. And in 2022, again, I made up this number, it's not advocacy, you had a $10 million operating override. So this was the most expensive from a tax standpoint, just because obviously we kind of maxed out or went to the top end of both a capital project override, excluded debt override, and operating override. And so in the next column then that matches color by color, you'll see a yellow horizontal row and a green row. The yellow row shows the incremental cost to the taxpayer from the excluded debt, and the green row shows the incremental cost to the taxpayer from the override. And as Libby correctly points out, Obviously, the excluded debt override or any single excluded debt override has a finite length of usually 20 years. Maybe there's some variance around that. Clearly, there could be subsequent excluded debt overrides that would, move beyond that. But any excluded debt override itself will have a finite life. An operating override, to the contrary, is perpetual. It becomes part of the levy at that point, and doesn't go away unless you have, I guess, an underride, which would take it back. So if I can just show you a little bit here what's going on, because this is functionally what's in the model. So when you have the model at your disposal, you can enter any value you want in this column to see what happens to the model with different debt assumptions on the excluded debt side. And you can enter any number you want over this 10-year period for an operating override. You can enter more than one operating override, whatever you want. I don't know if you can actually add an underride, but you could enter a negative number and see what happens. I don't know. I didn't ask John Asher that question. And then to the right here, what you can't see is, I think you also have the ability to change the long-term borrowing rates. Those are set right now at about 3.5 or 3.25, and they're stepping up over a period of time, similar to how we budgeted the water company acquisition. And I think those may be a variable. So if you want to play games with interest rates in the future, you can do that and at least see the sensitivity to the interest rate as a function of tax bill impact. So then moving down into the summary results section, and I will, this you got to look at quite carefully. And I think John did a couple iterations about how to present this, and Libby and I know had some input, and he tweaked it a little bit, but it still is really, it's worth being very careful that you look at the column headers to understand what you're looking at here. So this first column is the 10-year total. Now I'm about to screw it up for you. No, I guess that's right.
No, you're on it. You're right.
I'm just trying to understand why the base property tax is $310 a year. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the increase. That's what's going on. That's 2.5. Okay. So let me come back to the base property tax increase. The yellow line in this is where it gets a little messy because, okay, sorry, I'm talking to myself. In the operating override starts in 2022. So the 10-year average is actually a good number because otherwise, the problem with the excluded debt is that since it starts in 2025, this $620 is not a good number because it's a 10-year average from 2022 to 2031. And the excluded debt comes in the middle of that. So the average understates the cost, but we'll get to that. So 1283 is the 10-year average cost, which is consistent with what I had in one of the earlier models that you saw in the graph. And so that is the marginal cost to the taxpayer from a $10 million override on average over the first 10 years of the override. But obviously the taxes are increasing due to Prop 2.5 and other things as well as we go along, even without excluded debt. The excluded debt override, I think the best number to really look at is kind of one of these out year annual averages, which starts to take into consideration a number of years in which a full period of average in which the debt has been outstanding. But there's also a little bit of movement in this number because, correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, I think this is modeled at level principal repayments. So as principal was repaid on a level basis, it's not like your mortgage, the actual principals, the actual total payments start to fall as the principal falls, the interest falls with it. So that's why a 10-year average helps out. So think about it as 865, which I think is also consistent with the number that I had in my model. When we leave the summary page, we get into a much more detail, but I think, again, if someone has an interest in this, the model is really very clear and it's very easy. The dots are put very close together in terms of how things are calculated. So I really would encourage people who are curious about how this works, not only the mechanics, but the sensitivities, to spend some time in this model and look at it. And so with that, let me just open it up for you. But this gives you an idea of the level of detail that's in there. And I think it's super helpful if you have the appetite for it, but that's an if. I will grant you that. So hold on one second. Let me, Okay, so here is the familiar excluded debt variable entry points, and then the appropriation entry points for the operating override. Yeah, it looks like those are changeable for the long-term rates if you so choose. So let me make this just a little bit bigger. And scream if I cut you off of my screen. I can't tell what you're looking at. But for example, you'll notice if you just keep your eyes on the green line here, if in 2022 we did a $3 million override, you see there that the average annual increase is $385 in the first 10 years, $363 later on. There's some nuance we won't go into about why that average changes. But again, it's kind of like we talked about the other day, where if you want to skip the model altogether and just think about things in your head, it's not an unreasonable position to think that an operating override costs the average taxpayer about $125, $130 a year per $1 million. So this at $3 million gets you to about $385 of incremental. 5 million will get you to 641, and so forth. 10 million gets you to 1280. So kind of that rule of thumb, $120 per household, per average household, per $1 million of operating override. On the excluded debt side, again, let's just make it easy and do it in 2022. If we did a $10 million operating override, or excuse me, excluded debt override, which is a small override, every $10 million, again, now every $10 million of excluded debt, for round numbers and ease of calculation, is about $100 per household, 84 in this case, 89 in the out years. So, ballpark, that's where you're talking about. And I think the point that Bob has made and that Libby was getting at as well, which is a really important one, is that, you don't have to be a math major to see that $1 million override at costing $130 a year is different than a $1 million excluded debt override costing you $10 a year. So there's a difference, order of magnitude difference. Obviously, there's an order of magnitude difference in the impact of the dollars too. I mean, that's part of the calculation, but something to think about. So I can go through other parts of this. I guess the one other piece I will show you on this page, which I do find quite helpful, let me change this a little bit to make it more salient, is that if you do nothing other than enter numbers in the yellow and green boxes and then scroll down a little bit, you do get presented with John Asher's masterpiece of an automatically populating graph that shows you the average property tax bill over, from 2022 to 2031, with the operating override impact in the green and the excluded debt override impact in the yellow. And so that just gives you, again, kind of an order of magnitude of both the relative proportion of the tax bill associated with either override, and then the total tax bill, including both overrides. So this graph, I think, is helpful in terms of just putting some of those things in context as well as it relates to the tax bill. So Bob, I might stop there if anyone's still awake and just.
I think that's a good point to ask for questions, Dave. And we have that one other scenario to run through in a few minutes. But let me see if anybody has a hand up. Any members of the advisory committee that have questions at this point? First of all, I want to thank you, Dave, for doing so much work on this. It's really phenomenal presentation.
Happy
It
to
should
do
be
it.
very
Thanks.
helpful to people down the road. Andy McElhaney?
Andy,
You're
I think-
muted, Andy.
Andy, you're muted.
Sorry. Dave, I want to go back to the slide with the stripes.
Yeah. All right, forgive me. Let me dig back in there. Hang on.
And I just want to ask, are those stripes moving or am I having a stroke?
I can't opine on the second part, but I would say that stripes are probably not moving.
Oh, damn.
We can
I
only
hate
hope.
that.
Yeah.
I hope we didn't need
You
a
don't actually
flashing.
need me to
image
pull
this
up the
morning.
PDF. You just need me to call a doctor. Is that what you're saying? Okay, does anybody want
This
that?
is fabulous work. Gee, I just can't say enough about it.
Well, you're nice. I mean, honestly, my work was a fraction of what John Asher put in. So, you know, if when you see him, thank him, and Jim Taylor too.
You're muted again, Andy.
I don't think he's asking a question.
Oh,
Well, I just did, I walked away from a second. I think Libby, when Libby asked the question, which was, these do not include the 2.5% increase each year.
They do.
They do. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it includes, I mean, when you dig into John's model, it includes every aspect of taxes with the two variables being the two kinds of overrides.
you can see that on the dashboard in John's model.
Yeah.
The last screens that Dave was working with. Aaron has a question.
Thanks. I was curious, I understand the model and the way that you can put the overrides in there, but is there a way to combine sort of what we reviewed last week with the, for example, the 2.3 million that we were working with from a surplus standpoint, and fold that analysis in there with the override to see how that affects the overall?
Yeah, I know what you're driving at. I think we probably just have to run kind of the two, like this thing that I now have on my screen with John's model in parallel, because they're kind of speaking to two different things. In other words, I think we would probably try to use this sensitivity analysis to drive our idea of what an override might have to be or what we might want it to be. And then we would plug that into John's model to see the tax impact.
So it almost would be more of a defraying against what it is that what that one model.
Yeah, I don't, because John's model itself doesn't speak much to a forecast or what the uses of the proceeds would be, or what, I mean, it doesn't consider fund balance. It really just considers, you know, you tell it, I need, you know, what would X override of either type cost me as a taxpayer? And that's what John's spits out. It really doesn't, it's not intended to speak to really how do you solve this problem. It's more a question of like, what does a proposed solution cost?
Okay, thank you.
There's
And
nothing
Dave-
on the screen now, Dave, right?
Oh, there
Yeah,
isn't?
there's no file
Oh,
being
this-
shared, just so you know. But Dave, I would just add there, or I guess to Aaron's point, that if there were, I mean, I think the first step is what are those additional funding sources, which would, as you put it, it would then potentially defray the need for, say, a fiscal 22 override. If there were funding sources from other places, such as either a fiscal 21 surplus or some fund balance.
And we're going to we're going to go back to the sensitivity model, Libby, and run an illustration of one of those scenarios in a moment. And in the meantime, Evan had a question.
Yeah, it's kind of a question and a comment and builds on Aaron's point. I actually like this view better for a number of reasons, because it gives you more concrete examples or gives you a better idea of what the financial impact will be at an individual level. The issue I had with the model from last week is we're kind of plugging numbers in a current year, yet our forecasting is not very tight, and we forecast very conservatively. So I think it creates unnecessarily, you know, a much bleaker picture in key out years than if we actually kind of baselined what our new revenue growth numbers might be, where things might drop into the future. So I agree, David, this kind of would kind of be run in parallel to that. But I do think if we're going to use the tool from last week, we need to probably not forecast quite as conservatively and a little bit more in line with the way things have actually come out the last 5 or 6 years.
The next thing we're going to run may help you with that, Evan. Any other questions from members of the advisory committee on the tax model so far? Any questions from any other members of town boards or committees? I'm not seeing any hands. Questions from members of the public. I see Priya Howell has her hand up. Priya, could you identify yourself by name and address?
Hi, Priya Howell, 26 Del Pret Drive. Thanks, Bob. Dave, thank you so much for this. I just had a question of something I was hoping to clarify. When we discuss an override, we often talk about it as a permanent tax increase. And I just wanted to confirm, my understanding is that an override is a permanent increase to the town's tax base. So if you increased your tax base from like 100 million to 110 million going forward in any year, you could increase your taxes by 2.5% of your tax base. So in this case, it would be like 2.5% of 110 million. I can't do that math, but whatever that number would be under Prop 2.5. But I don't think you're required to increase your taxes by 2.5% every year. So if in the future you wanted to only increase your taxes by 2% or 1% or leave it flat, you could still do that, notwithstanding the fact that you had an override. So if you found cost savings and you suddenly didn't need all that money, you could create what we call excess levy capacity. And I just want to understand if I'm understanding that correctly. It's really an increase to our levy capacity that is permanent and not necessarily an increase to property taxes that is permanent.
Let me take a shot at that, Dave. An override, many people view as a one-time correction to what we might refer to as structural deficits in an operating budget. So that when you have an override, the base upon which the 2.5% that you can increase your taxes every year goes up. And then, of course, there's a little bit of a multiplier as you go down the years. And you're right, Priya. I mean, for example, until this year, we have had $500,000 of unused tax levy capacity that has been involved in our financial planning, I think since Bruce Rebuffer was the chair of the Board of Selectmen. So I think what you said was essentially correct. Dave, Libby, Sue, you want to modify that in any way?
She's absolutely correct.
Okay.
But the
All
only
right.
thing, Sue, I just want to make sure I wanted to clarify is that, I was totally with Priya until the very end when she said, so it's not a permanent increase, but that amount of the override will permanently increase the tax base, which therefore means your property taxes are permanently increased. And then whether or not the town is taxes to the maximum 2.5% allowable by Proposition 2.5 is a separate topic, but the override will permanently increase not just the tax base, but property owners' real estate taxes.
Well, it will increase the tax base. But if the selectmen decide not to tax the whole thing, they don't have to.
Right.
I guess, Bob, though, isn't it, I mean, as a practical matter, I mean, this is all correct. The town wouldn't have to tax to that amount. But to the extent that overrides are often for operating expenses, and the operating expenses are often for, in large measure, personnel, if you were not taxing, you would be
Laying them off.
you'd be laying off. So you'd be facing a
Yes,
difficult situation.
exactly.
So as a practical matter, it would be difficult for the town to cut the taxes.
I guess the reason I was asking is, for example, we're hiring a number of, or I shouldn't say we're hiring. Potentially, there's an ask that the schools get to hire for a number of additional positions as part of the recovery budget. If at some point we recovered, we may not need all of those positions. We might, who knows how things all play out. But it's not a given that every year this is the minimum your taxes will be. If cost savings were found either in the school budget or in another budget, your taxes could still go up or down depending on what the town's needs were in the future.
Every year, there's an opportunity for the town to manage revenues and expenses. And that's kind of what we do. So yeah, if enrollment goes down, if the school administration decides that they no longer need 32 additional full-time employees, sure, you're absolutely right. The budgetary pressures are lessened, and it helps with financial management. Does that basically answer your question, Priya?
Yes, it does. I just wanted to understand because I do think it's an important distinction, that it's a permanent increase to our levy or our tax base, not necessarily a permanent increase to our taxes forevermore. But thank you for clarifying that for me.
Sure.
Let me just add, Bob, if I could, to the extent that an override is designed to address a structural deficit in an operating budget, then there's no realistic chance of it not being used in subsequent years.
I think probably realistically and historically, that's true. And I don't believe there has ever been an underride in the history of Massachusetts. So I suppose nothing's permanent. There are always possibilities, but you're right about the realities, Andy. Are there any other questions from other members of the public? If so, please use the raise hand function and identify yourself by name and address and address your questions to the chair. And I don't see any at this point. So there was one other scenario and a concept that Dave and I talked about today. It goes back to the forecast sensitivity that I think we can quickly run through.
Hang on. Bear with me here. You guys see that?
I've got a gray block on the right side of my screen.
All right, hold on one second.
Did you mean to take us to Adult Friend Finder, Dave?
That's on my son's computer now.
Dave, I think that gray box it's in the spreadsheet.
Right.
Yeah, I think it is too. It's just where it gets funky because it's hard to tell what is on your screen and what's on mine.
I could see through 2026 and then it went gray.
Yeah, what you're saying,
Yeah.
you're saying everything you can
Yeah.
see in what you sent us last week.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, if you maximize it just like you had it a second ago, it's
Yeah.
a little bit easier to read. That's fine. You're always going to
That's-
see the gray because it's a set page.
Okay,
That's
so you
great.
can see. Okay.
Now,
I'm sorry, Bob, what did you want to run here?
well, this is showing, I can't see the bottom line, but is this
It's
showing?
nothing. I mean, there's no variables. Everything's a zero right for now.
Okay, so we were in the last forecast we had, there was roughly $2.3 million in fund balance that was going to be used.
That's here. Yep.
Okay, so that's in there. And that brings the deficit down to almost 4 million. And then we see in the out years, in parentheses, future deficits. And if we, so for example, if we were to put in a $3 million override, for FY '22. That then, absent other actions, still leaves us with a $927,000 deficit. Now, an idea has been raised concerning the use of, say, up to $500,000 of fund balance going forward annually to tamp down the effect of the future deficits. And so if you were to put in $500,000 additional fund balance this year and in, say, the next 4 years after that, and has the calculation happened?
I'm afraid so.
Okay, so we're still left with a deficit.
Can you scroll down a little bit, Dave?
Yeah, it couldn't have happened yet.
Go down, we can't see the green. There you go, thank you.
So we're still left with deficits.
Well, and those are unrealistic growth rates.
I understand, Nancy, the limitations of the forecast and that.
No, it's not a limitation of the
they-
forecast, it's just, we need to update the growth rate.
They're set at 2% rather than a realistic.
Expenses.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not
We've
talking about
never
revenue.
had a 2%.
Well, there's an issue about revenue growth as well as municipal and school budget growth. So that, there could be revenue replacement coming in here that helps the situation. And of course, if we suppose we raise both the municipal and education budgets to 3%. You obviously see bigger deficits.
And you mean to still have the $3 million override up above?
Yeah, yes. I mean, the bigger the override, the lower the deficit, at least initially.
But I don't think the education annual budget growth rate has been under 4% for the last 10 years. And it's been up to 4.5.
It's been more in 4.5 to 4.7 the last few years.
So,
All right, we can raise the education growth budget to 4.5. And so we see even worsening deficits. So we've got a we've got a budget problem to solve before the end of March. But then we have years of potential budget problems to solve, depending on what happens to a number of factors.
Dave, could you roll up for a minute?
Sure.
22, 3 million override. So that's total tax levy is 95. Plus another 500.
I mean, for what it's worth too, what's missing here, even though maybe the 500K a year is a proxy, is that there is the prospect of federal funds of some magnitude. I mean, that's TBD, obviously.
Yeah, there's
probably a number greater than zero.
Yeah, there's 130 billion earmarked for education and in subsequent out years. So it's not a one-time annual money.
Do you know how many out years it's expected?
I think in what I read, Julie, it said 2 to 3, but again, I'm not the policy expert. I was in the New York Times or CNN last weekend.
Yeah, I actually saw 200 billion for municipalities. So I assume 130 of that is for education. But anything the town of Hingham gets on the municipal side helps as well.
Yep.
So
Dave, what if, I think, Bob, you've mentioned a transfer station tax, or not a tax, but permit fee, whatever we want to call it. And what if that raised $1 million a year, which I think is a number I've heard tossed around? And if we put that in 22, Dave, what would that?
It'd be additional local receipts.
It hasn't happened yet, so.
So maybe you put it in 23. Just doing what if. So what happens there?
Yeah, I'm just going to put it here for the moment. Did it add?
What if we predict a giant meteor sometime around 2025?
I think that's beyond the scope of the agenda.
It just hits you, Evan?
So is the transfer station. Yeah.
That's a targeted meteor.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, George, you did it.
Yes, it's row 17.
Oh, no, you didn't. Never mind.
Did it change? I guess it was 28 million before. Now it's 20 million.
Well, again, everybody has this to play with. You can put in any numbers you want in any of those slots you want within limits and see what it looks like. Are there other questions on the sensitivity tool for tonight?
I had a question about the give backs at the end of the year.
Yep.
And I apologize, Bob, I didn't raise my hand.
There you go. You're recognized. And then Julie.
Okay. Is there a way to predetermine? Is there a way to direct those into a specific bucket?
Well, they basically go to fund
No, it goes
balance.
to fund balance.
And so it has to go to fund balance and then get voted back out.
It has to.
Okay.
Every revenue, every expense has to go to fund balance first.
Okay.
And have in mind that the next fiscal year, we have our financial policy review. So we will have the ability to think long and hard about potential revisions to the financial policy in light of the COVID experience. Julie, you had a question.
I was wondering if you can show Dave, if you put more into additional fund balance for fiscal year 22, say more than the 2.367, and we added to money to that 500,000. Say you say, oh, we've got all this extra money. Let's plug in, I don't know, come up with a number and then show where it flows through.
Well, we've got roughly 6 billion of fund balance that could be used before going below the 20%.
Right. So I was just wondering, because if you're not using that, if you're using a chunk of money this year, then it puts you into a hole starting the next year. When you're doing your budgeting for the next year, you would have to continue to put in that amount. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
not in this model.
For the conversations about fund balance, I mean, obviously the challenge with fund balance is going to be, I mean, it sounds like someone's being conservative when they say they don't want to pay for operating expenses with fund balance. But the fact is that an operating expense is by definition recurring and the fund balance is not. And therein lies the challenge. I mean, so we can mask a problem or kick it down the road with a fund balance injection, but you're not really, facing the music in terms of the impact to the extent that the expenses recur. I mean, that's the rub.
Right. I'm not suggesting it necessarily as a solution. I just want to
I know.
show that it is sort of helps in the short term, doesn't help in the longer term, and what the in terms of recurring expenses. So it's difficult.
Well, and I think it raises, one of the things I know I've talked to some of you about is is, I think if all of us had a magic wand, we would, if we're going to do an override, we'd like to take some time to get it, just to, to do all the work we would do associated with figuring out the right amount and all those other kind of things. And, whether we have that luxury is not clear. Because certainly that would be everybody's preference rather than trying to and we've got a deadline right now, but we've got to be creative.
Nancy and then Andy.
So following along on Julie's comment though and kind of going back to so we always know that there's a little bit of budget that comes back, or at least in my experience, the years I've watched. But in my, I'm more thinking on the capital outlay side, is that I know that that's structural, but that's also one-time expenses, right? So is there a way to feed money back into that? Or does that, tell me if I'm crazy, Libby, is that not helpful because it's after the fact? Or it's delayed, if you will?
Well, as far as this model goes, there's no difference really, because you're just taking it out of, it's just a matter of which bucket it's in. Because yes, you can use non-recurring items from fund balance, which does include capital, but ultimately, if you're taking that from fund balance, the math is really no different than kind of the scenario we have right now. Like if you just assumed 3.5 of what Dave had in there for additional fund balance was capital, then the math is still going to be the same.
Right, except for, and I'm thinking of, you don't create that huge hole like Julie was talking about. If it's operational, if you hire teachers next year, you got to fire teachers. If I buy
the result
trucks and ambulances that I need this year, I don't have to get rid of them next year.
Right, but the result is the same thing, which is you're eroding fund balance to pay for something that is kind of an capital needs, globally speaking, are ongoing. So the math is still the same, whether you said that part of that 3.5 went to capital or part went to operating, it's the result is still the same. You're eroding that kind of corpus of fund balance.
Okay.
If that.
Andy?
I just want to make sure I understand this. The second column is fiscal 22, correct, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, and in that column you added the $3 million override, and then you also added, if you scroll up a little bit, the 3.5 or about 5.8 total from fund balance. 2.3 right there, yeah.
Yeah, 5.86, right.
Right, but now follow the 2.3 and 3.5. As you go to the right, it doesn't show in those columns. So you're not putting anything from fund balance into the budget. Well, you're putting 500,000 from fund balance into the budget in the outgoing years, 23, 24, 25, 26, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that brings you down to a surplus in 22 and 23, and then the deficit in 24, 25, 26. And that assumes that there's no increase in expenses. Is that it? Or is it?
It's,
yes.
Those are assuming 2% growth rates.
Wait, which ones? This
He's
what you're looking
saying
at
that
now
row-
is 3 and 4.5.
Yeah,
No,
Dave,
just above that, the gray
he's
line
saying row
for forecast.
29, Dave.
Oh,
He's
this
saying
line.
row
Sorry, this is
29.
2 and 2, right?
Yeah, so
Yep.
so what does that assume in terms of expense increases each year?
This is 2 and 2, 2% across the board.
Okay,
So if I made this 0.02 and this 0.02, it should be 0. Yeah.
And if you use 6 million in fund balance in FY22, you may have run out of fund balance to use in any future year.
yeah,
Because
so you might not have that.
it would potentially go below 20%.
Or you change the policy.
Yeah,
Or you think about changing the policy, yeah.
Okay, let me just follow this through because it may, so in this model, assuming more realistically, annual budget growth rates of 3% municipal and 4.5 education, then even with the 5.8 or $6 million infusion from fund balance in 22, in 23, you have the 1.8 deficit, right?
Yes.
And that increases up to,
Well, yes, you have a 1.8 deficit, but what I just added here is that we have this 2.1 in surplus here, which would theoretically go to fund balance. We would, with this 3.5 million that Julie in her hypothesis would give us a surplus there. So we get to carry 4.8 million of those surpluses into 23. So we wouldn't, that's what I was trying to reflect here, is that on a cumulative basis, you're kind of overfunding these early years, but it still doesn't solve your out year problem.
so that would show that you have a, okay, so you have a 1.7, no, you have a surplus in 23, but an astronomical deficit in 26. Is that it? 16 million, 7?
That's a cumulative deficit, yeah.
Oh, that's
so-
the cumulative. Okay, I'm sorry.
Dave,
All right, so-
that's really, I think that takes away from it.
Well,
Others have had their hands up. I'd like to recognize people in some kind of orderly fashion.
Oh,
Are you all set, Andy?
Okay, let me just think out loud for a minute. So the prior year cumulative deficit, current year revised surplus of deficit, 23 with the infusion of 5.8 million fund balance in 22 produces a 1.7 deficit in 23 with the 3 and 4.5% budget growth rates, right?
Right.
And then if you add no additional revenues in the out years, except for the 500,000 from fund balance, you end up with the deficits of 3.9, 6.2, and 8.8, correct? Am I reading that right?
I'm sorry. Yes, you were reading that correctly, that there is.
Okay.
Yep.
That answers my questions. Thank you.
Okay, I think in the order I've seen them, Tina, then Al, then Evan.
So this is so great. This is so interesting. I was looking through some of the presentations on the Selectmen's website and noticing how large a portion of our budget the school budget is. And it looks like it's growing year over year. And I'm wondering, because it's so large and because we're assuming a 4.5% growth rate on this large portion of our budget, it would eventually just get to large. So do other communities, do they, what's the word I want? Like, do they peg that percentage or do they peg the growth rate?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but I think ACES has asked today, maybe, the school folks for comparative data of our benchmark communities of how their education budgets have grown. But I don't know that we presently have that
No,
information.
we asked that, but I mean, Tina, your question is a good one. And I think I don't have a really good answer for you. I have a couple anecdotal examples from other communities, and I think they handle them differently. I mean, our old head of South Shore Country Club used to be on the Board of Selectmen in Fall. Where was he from? Somewhere in the Cape.
Town manager in Marion.
In Marion. And basically they just told the school department, this is what you get, period. You know, so that they just looked at the budget. They kind of did it the other way. And so I think communities do it in different ways. And I think, you know, one of the conversations George and I had with a subset of the of the school committee today was just a question of around the growth rate of that budget. And that's, you put your finger on it. I mean, at the end of the day, the vexing aspect of this model, as many numbers and permutations as we want to put into it, is that when you grow revenue at 2.5% and you grow expenses at 4.5%, something's going to blow out someday. And that's the challenge.
You set, Tina?
Yeah, thanks.
Alan?
Thanks again, Dave, for all the work on this. It's great. And just two assumption things to toy with. One was you did the previous presentation assumed the 5% or showed the data for the $5 million operating override.
Oh yeah, I can put that in here.
May be relevant.
Oh yeah, no, we can do any and all, like I said.
Yeah, I mean, just because you had done the work on the other side of showing what the cost was, might as well see what the impact is. And then just to keep it alive as a conversation point, I would say the other assumption I mentioned last week also is a feasible way to address this is, instead of spending 137,572,000, you could spend some amount less, and that would have an impact too.
Dave, do you want to take out my 3.5 million fund balance extra or not?
Where should I send the bill?
Sue Nickerson. You all set, Alan?
I mean, I don't know if that registered or just people disagree with this so vehemently they don't say anything, but
your point is that if you decrease,
if you spend 136,572,000, it might have an impact.
Yeah, if you say we just can't afford that big a budget, then you have to cut it someplace, and it's going to change the numbers, right?
Keep it alive as a discussion point. I raised it again. Yes,
which is what EdCom has recommended in the past for school budgets, but whether that's this year or not remains to be seen. You all set with your questions, Al? I don't want to.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, Evan, you're up.
Yeah, so I think it's less of a question than more of an general comment. I think this is good. I didn't mean to interrupt whoever I was talking to before, or who was talking before. I do think the cumulative effect is a little bit alarming, because you would never have this cumulative effect. You would actually take care of that in subsequent out years. You would have to. I mean, you can't deficit spend. And again, the point is, we plan conservatively with the forecast. We've never really had a very tight forecast out more than a single year. So I do think that what Dave presented earlier, what is the potential kind of tax increase per person, is a bit more helpful. This is good if you're doing some financial modeling, but again, we need to zero in on what problem are we trying to solve for. School budget, municipal budget, this is helpful, but it's just a tool. So
completely. We're talking about concepts. George?
Yeah, just real quick, Bob, if I think I'm understanding this, and if I am, then the two rows that I'm focused on are 24 and 35. And the delta between those two on a yearly basis is the problem we have. Revenues growing at one level and expenses growing at another.
Exactly.
And they have to match.
Okay. I don't see any other hands from members of the AdCom. Any further questions from AdCom members? Julie? Do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that in the, let's see, local receipts. Sorry, thank you. So in new growth, it has been adjusted in this most recent forecast. But I know those are conservative numbers, but we also have to consider the impact of COVID and the slowdown in building projects. And I know that the town has thought about what the impact would be about growth in South Hingham, but that's not for a number of years out. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the AdCom?
Was that just saying that maybe that new growth number should be upped in later years? Is that the idea?
Well, it could be, but you just don't know. But what I'm saying is it's conservative right now for the next couple of years. And I think that that's actually accurate.
It's too far down the road, Alan, to budget in any reasonable way.
Okay.
I see Mr. Greg Corbett's had his hand up for a while. Mr. Corbett, I'll recognize you. Can you please identify yourself by name and address and
Greg.
address your question to the chair?
Thank you, Chair. Greg Corbett, 70 Winter Street. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for your presentation. I had a really quick question, maybe even a point of clarification, or when you were talking about the unassigned fund balance, I heard several references to the policy of not going below 20%. I had thought the policy let you go down to 15 or 16% under the existing policy. Can you clarify on that?
The existing financial policy sets a target for unassigned fund balance of between 16 to 20% of total annual expenditures. And the problem with going below 20% is that the town's financial advisors have indicated that that raises the potential for a negative outlook in terms of bond rating, which would affect the rates at which we could borrow money, and also conceivably our accessibility to the bond markets. Also, it's a little bit of a fluid number because TAE goes up every year so that the denominator changes in determining the percentage. Now, I've actually taken a look at this in terms of what future fund balance might look like, but our town accountant always cautions us against making any kinds of assumptions about what will actually end up in unassigned fund balance. But we do know that there are some water acquisition costs that are going into fund balance, and that there are going to be some turnbacks of a substantial amount going into fund balance. So the future is not especially bleak in terms of potential adds to fund balance, but we won't know how much of that goes to unassigned fund balance until probably next December or so, when the town audit is finished. Sue Nickerson, anything you want to add to that?
You said it perfectly, Bob.
Okay. Well, I've had good teachers.
Can I ask a quick follow-up then?
Sure.
Have you done an analysis, or does someone know the answer as to what percentage below the 20% you can safely use without calling into question the AAA bond rating? Or at what level does it become more of a concern?
I don't know that there's any definitive answer to that until somebody actually went to a bond rating issue in order to issue a new borrowing. We know from the 2009 time frame that when the bond rating agencies were looking at Hingham's fund balance, that it was regarded as a negative factor to be operating with diminishing fund balance. I think it's a fine line to draw. There is also a further issue in that our existing financial policy states that fund balance should only be used for certain things, such as large capital projects, such as tax relief. and should not be used for recurring operational expenses. So the approach that's been taken so far has been to try to identify what are non-recurring expenses or revenue losses with respect to affecting the fiscal year 22 budget, and making that $2.3 million number that we talked about earlier basically represents that in terms of a use of fund balance. That enough detail for you?
Thank you. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. And
Bob, can I just ask a follow-up to that? It's Andy.
Evan had his hand up. I don't know whether it's supposed to be up or not.
No, it is. It's supposed to be up. I'm trying to follow the rules, Bob.
Okay, well, I'm going to put you in a dangerous position, Evan, because I'm going to give Andy the floor after you.
Fantastic. Actually, my comment is just making the point that Mr. Corbett just made. And we talk about the bond rating agencies quite a bit. And I think it's important because it does, and we've seen it play out with the rates that we've been given when we did the water company acquisition, et cetera. But I think that, we are, a town that has a buildup in funds that we've seen as a reaction to the 2008, 2009, which was a financial crisis, right? This is a global pandemic, kind of once in 100-year thing. I cannot believe that the rating agencies are going to ding municipalities, including, Hingham, for using their own money to manage their way out of kind of a once every 100-year crisis. And I don't know, but I just suspect that, we may be able to modify the policy to be able to, one-time use some of our fund balance to solve some of these hopefully short-term problems.
Well,
And I don't know, somebody has a better answer on
policy's up for review next year. And I'm sure it will be addressed. And Andy, you had a question or follow-up?
Yeah, on the issue of the fund balance, if I look at column D and go down to row 23 for that's a total sources of funds, 142,465,782. So if I wanted to have a fund balance of 18%, I would take 18% of that $142 million figure. Is that correct, Dave?
No, I'm going to have to ask Sue to explain what TAE is precisely. I forget.
TAE does not include the water company budget or the South Shore Country Club budget.
But otherwise, it's all expenses.
Otherwise, it's basically the expenses, yeah.
Okay, Sue, I'm sharing my screen. Do you remember what TAE was last for 2020? Roughly?
No, I would have to get my fund balance memo.
I get that.
All right,
It was 119
Bob's got it
million.
under his pillow.
Bob always has that at the ready.
I put this under my pillow at night.
You thought it was a joke. I was telling you the truth.
And TAE
Don't ask me how I knew.
119,142,820.
TAE is Articles 4, 5, and 6. So yes, it does include the water company and South Shore Country Club and sewer. Operating budget does not include that.
I took a look at the numbers and I thought that there was a deduction there, Sue.
Now, when we include, so we haven't been including water in TAE because
water just started there.
Right. So that's going to throw, if we stick to that definition, that's in and of itself is going to throw TAE out of whack and then fund balance out of whack.
Yes, it will.
Right.
The total Article 6 budget last year was 126 million.
Yeah, that's the budget, not how much we spent.
Okay,
It's E, it's not B.
okay, all right, got it.
And Bob, I would just say for the purpose of the capital outlay presentation tonight, Eric was just asking me like, based on our most recent budget, would we be within the financial policy for capital? And so as Sue said, total annual expenditures are Articles 4, 5, 6. And then you back out the enterprise funds, country club, sewer, and the water, plus the debt service and benefits to get the operating budget. So different financial policies, for the benefit of, I guess the citizen who was asking that have different metrics, but so maybe you're thinking of the operating budget. But anyway, we were just looking at that today because of the capital presentation.
Yeah, I think I looked at that in the warrant for last year. I think the warrant used 3.3% of TAE for capital, and certainly the numbers we're talking about this year are going to be well within 2.5 to 5%.
Financial policy for capital is based on the operating budget, not TAE. Just so you know.
So, Andy, are you all set?
No, I just want to know what the number in column D, or if it's not in column D, just tell me that, I would use to determine what the contribution to fund balance should be to keep it at the 16 to 20% range.
You can't from this, Andy, because TAE is total annual expenditures. It's what's been spent that year. Fund balance is done once a year. It's on June 30th. So you have to take what was actually totally spent on Articles 4, 5, and 6 on 6/30 to find what your percentage would be.
And that includes the
And that's just unassigned fund balance. You have to take total fund balance, and then you have to take out the encumbrances, the assigned, the committed, and then what is left is unassigned.
Yeah.
And then you divide that by what was actually spent. That gives you your percentage.
Okay.
But Andy, I think it's safe to say, and this is kind of implicit in your question, is that if you have significant expense growth, as is anticipated in the 2022 budget as requested, that almost by definition, assuming it gets spent, will increase the denominator, and thereby if fund balance increased by not one penny, its percentage would decline.
Precisely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an important metric, and I think that's what Bob and Victor is driving at, and Victor's is a really important point too, which is that if you're adding in all of a sudden the water company of the expenses, you've increased the denominator significantly. And that's a debate that's probably worth having or is being had somewhere, because I think it raises some good questions. But
Okay. Everybody set with questions on this?
Can I get it? I have my.
Julie has one.
Oh, okay. I see you now, Julie.
Sorry, just back of the napkin. Are we talking about it? Which way would it go if we have water company as part of the TAE? That percent.
Percentage go down because the denominator goes up.
yeah, it's not helpful to fund balance usage to include that in TAE.
Yeah, it's not helpful to that band of the 16 to 20. Just as Dave said, if expenses didn't even go up a penny, or our fund balance didn't go up a penny, we'd move down below where we are now. So we're above the upper bound. We're going to start to go lower just from, fund balance didn't change at all.
And so it's up to the town to decide whether we want to include water in TAE. Is that what we're saying?
I think it's probably going to be up to us in the first instance, because that'll be part of our financial policy review next year.
But Sue, did you say
So do it before I do my fund balance memo, and we'll be good.
Right. I was just going to say, Sue, when you come to do your 6/30/21 fund balance memo as it stands today, are you instructed to include the water company in TAE?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know how the auditors are going to treat the water company. If they treat it as a separate entity, then it probably will not be part of the general fund. It might be a separate, column in our financials, so it might not, they might not have those expenditures in there. I do not know. I won't know until the auditors start digging in.
Well, man, it would sure seem, just as a sidebar, that if we don't get the benefit of the surplus to spend in the town, that we shouldn't get saddled with with expenses that have a dedicated revenue source. But that's my own, I'll talk to the auditors, just send them my way.
Okay, I will give them your number.
Evan gets the text about the full bathroom. I get the auditor. That's the way it rolls around here.
Okay. I know everybody's prolonging this discussion because they don't want to get to minutes. But is
I'll
there?
stop sharing if that's okay with everybody.
Yes, thank
All
you.
respects.
Thank you again, Dave.
No
Great
problem.
presentation. And thank everybody. As I said to Julie this afternoon, in 3.5 weeks, our decision will be made. And she said, oh, thank goodness, or words to that effect. But I think
Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that's motivating.
that this careful attention to detail of all these concepts and seeing what the options are and how they work will serve us well in ultimately making a decision in a very challenging year. So, and with that, on to the minutes of February 23rd of 2021. Has everybody had a chance to look at them?
I read them the minute George sends them out.
Have you ever taken a polygraph?
I refuse to answer that question. Grounds that it may incriminate me.
Are there any suggestions for further revisions? If not, I'll accept the motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. George?
Aye.
You better vote aye. Brenda?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Victor?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Libby?
Aye.
Erin?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
I think I got everybody, so.
Nothing like minutes to make that participant count number go down.
You have 14-0?
14-0.
Okay. Warrant articles update. Tina or George, did you distribute the revised comment?
I did. I sent that out this evening. We had voted on that article and now George and I are just looking for any additional comments before we submit it to the editors.
This was the Route 3A article, and
Correct.
you may recall in Andy's favorite word, the penultimate paragraph, I think there were suggestions for revisions in the comment. So if everybody's happy with the comment as written now.
When did it go out, Tina? I don't think
It went out literally at the beginning of this meeting. I'm sorry about that. I didn't see it I saw article update. I didn't know if we're going to cover it tonight or Thursday.
We can defer the review of that until Thursday night if people want to have a chance to see it.
I took the advice and added that table, which I know you said that the warrant doesn't love, but it just looks great. So I'm very supportive of it.
Would people be happy to do this Thursday night?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, let's do that. Warrant articles update. I know the town pier article is still up in the air. I've talked with Bill Reardon about that. I've had some communications with Libby about that. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Libby, that basically everyone's waiting for the Woods Hole Advisory Group to weigh in on some of the climate implications raised by Concom, but it's highly unlikely that their input will be received before people have to vote on the article. So it may simply come forward for a vote by the selectmen and then by us with less than all the information we might like. You want to add anything to that, Libby?
Nope, you said it perfectly.
Okay. So then the citizens petition on volunteers. Looks like the Attorney General's office is not going to say that, no, you can't have that kind of bylaw. So I believe the Board of Selectmen is going to hear that article Thursday night. So I will post a revised agenda saying that we're going to defer our hearing to next week. And I have exercised the rights of the chairman, or the chair, I should say, to spare you all from being liaisons of this, and I've appointed myself. So I will be in touch with Tom Patch, and we'll begin our discussions about that article.
Thank you, Bob.
I can always change my mind.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a warrant article update?
Yeah,
Brendan?
I do, Bob.
Yeah.
Article BB, is it?
Triple B.
Triple B is a planning board, well, I strike that. It's a citizens petition article that would amend the bylaws to permit detached accessory dwelling units. In 2018, the planning board amended the bylaw to permit attached accessory dwelling units subject to certain limitations. And a citizen, Ray Estes over on Fort Hill Street, has filed a citizens petition to expand this to include detached accessory dwelling units. The planning board is really struggling with this. They have heard it on 4 nights and debated it. In my own mind, they're struggling because on the one hand, they really don't want to see 2 dwelling units on one lot. But on the other hand, some of them like the idea of not making a distinction between detached and attached accessory units. And that frankly is almost insolvable contradiction, I think. What I think they're going to end up doing is they recognize that the citizen is going to go forward with the petition, so the town meeting will vote on the article as it currently exists unless the planning board amends it to some degree. And what they're thinking is that we should amend it, they should amend it to, as best they can, to make sure the concerns they have are at least are minimized, I should guess. So the idea is that Susan Murphy has been asked to redraft the article and put in the limitations that have been discussed by the board and present that to the boards, which they will hear and review on the 8th, this Monday. And I I don't know if they'll be ready to vote on it then. What do you think, Victor?
They could put it off because they have the master plan presentation on Monday, so they have a busy day. I think they might vote on the 15th.
I beg your pardon?
Conceivable they do on this Monday, but I wouldn't be surprised if it went to the 15th.
Yeah, okay.
Susan has talked with me and has asked kind of what is the latest possible date that we could address the planning board articles because of all of the challenges they've faced this year. But if I understand what you're saying, Andy, if she's redrafting an article for a citizen?
No, they recommended what she's going to propose.
Drafting a recommended motion to be proposed by the planning board.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I got it. And I understand, Victor, that the two floodplain articles may be combined.
Yeah, they voted them. They voted them in combination, and we just got, while our meeting was going on, Susan sent us an email saying that I guess the powers that be, she and John Coughlin perhaps, are recommending that there be an affirmative motion under AAA, which combines the two articles, and then if that were to pass, a no action under CCC.
Yeah, I sent her an email this morning suggesting that she may want to make the two articles one.
That's what they seem to be doing. Yeah.
Have the selectmen open the warrant and substitute the one combined article rather than causing a lot of confusion with two articles.
Yeah, that would be the other approach. That doesn't seem to be what they're doing.
Okay. All right. Brenda, any word on when we might be able to move forward on the climate action articles?
No, I got an email from Brad Moyer last night that the meeting with Paul Hanu was scheduled for this morning, but he wasn't sure that he was going to get a number from Paul. And since in terms of how much Light Plant will contribute, and I just checked again, no message back from him tonight. So I suspect no number did come through.
Okay.
So we know what the upper number is because we know what they're asking for at the max, but we don't know what part the Light Plant will contribute.
Okay, and the selectmen aren't going to vote that until they get that number.
They've already voted it. They voted it without a number,
Oh, I see. All right.
I think. I believe. Yes,
I
they
thought
voted
they
without
did-
a number and they asked that the recommended motion for Article P be amended to include going from a committee of 12 to a committee of 11.
Okay, all right. Any other warrant article updates? Yeah, Nancy?
Just Article N will probably be delayed at least a week, if not more. The building committee is working diligently and at all hours to negotiate with KBA to get to a final number for the design and construction documents.
Well,
And
that's Article N as in Nancy.
Article N is in Nancy.
Okay, I heard M of. that's
Sorry,
right.
Article N, which is, I apologize.
Okay,
Is the
Do you
building,
say M is in McDonald's or N is in Nancy?
which is the public safety facility. I apologize.
okay.
And so anyway, I'm in contact with them daily and we'll hopefully get to have something to comment on sooner than later here.
Maybe I get some insight from Tom Mayo tomorrow about when the selectmen will vote. And
We were hearing
while-
it tonight, but there was no vote. Sorry.
While we're talking about warrant articles, Julie, I would think that you may want to consult with the minority members on Article M, as in money, about the comment, so that everybody's kind of happy with where we end up.
Yes, I'll do that.
All right.
Bob, I had a question on the zoning article on the accessory dwelling units. Will that now be just a majority vote
Yes.
under the new housing choices law?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
which is precisely why the planning board is so concerned about redrafting with limitations.
Anything else on warrant articles? Any liaison reports? Yes, sir, Mr. McElhaney.
The master plan committee has posted on it has its own website on the official website. There's a master plan committee site, and the draft of the final master plan has been posted there. So I encourage you all to read all 177 pages of it. That plan gets submitted to the planning board, which is the entity that approves or accepts it on behalf of the town. And that process begins next Monday night, as Victor said. The planning board is going to take up the master plan. I assume there'll be more than one hearing on that, and then there'll be public hearings.
Okay, any other, Daveling?
The Hingham Development and Industrial Commission, I always forget, HDIC, has approved a letter to be sent to the planning board opposing the Amazon project at 100 Industrial Drive.
Other liaison reports?
Can you circulate that, Dave Lane?
I don't have the, I
Oh.
actually don't think I have a copy of the letter, but it should be posted as official documents on the planning board site, but I will check.
Okay, I'll check the planning board site as well.
Bob, I don't know who would be the person to ask this, but I wonder if that has any impact on the warrant article for HMPL about the,
HMLP.
yeah, thank you. It's late. For the Hobart Street. That extra, the additional, I don't know the terminology, but you know what I mean? They wanted to
Yeah.
add some- I'm curious if, because I thought when we heard about the whole Amazon warehouse, there was linkage to them needing to increase the capacity for the light plant.
Actually, Amazon, so I heard the Amazon presentation as part of one of these liaison, one of these meetings. And Amazon is not anywhere near ready to have electrical vehicles in its vans. In fact, they say they have to be manufactured. There's this whole line. So they're not looking at anything that would require excess, because I kept thinking of that light plant discussion we had. That's not even on the radar of this project from Amazon's perspective.
There are multiple other issues with the HMLP article.
So
Right. I just didn't know if there was linkage, but anyway, okay, thanks.
I don't think there is from what Amazon's perspective, because they really poo-pooed the idea that they would have electric vehicles there or solar panels there, or.
Yeah, I just meant from the town's perspective, but
We'll get to the HMLP article in due course, and we'll see what the selectmen do on it.
And other than that, Bob, I'm working on what would be the general rules for the gender neutral article.
Okay.
So
All right, great.
I hope to have that done in a few days.
Any further liaison reports?
God, I hope not.
Evan, you're
Well,
such a joyful person.
I've been on Zoom since 7 a.m.
I sit up straight, would you?
Yep.
We're obviously meeting Thursday. I think we're obviously going to be meeting Tuesday. I wouldn't be surprised if we had sufficient business to meet a week from Thursday as well. We're really in crunch time, so I think that's the likely meeting schedule. I think the selectmen are going to vote their budgets or the town budgets the week of March 15th, and we're probably looking at the following week to go through our detailed budget review and decide where we come out on the budget. The policies and procedures review, is that ready for prime time yet?
I think you said that would be on the 9th. And I hope that we're ready. I think we'll be ready.
Okay,
I'm
all
gonna be there.
right. Any town meeting, the dates remain the same. I've got no new information on election date. I believe a letter has been written to the governor. I'm not aware of any response. Are there any matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting? Okay, if not, I would accept the motion to adjourn.
So
Moved.
All right,
Second.
George?
Second,
George?
third, fourth.
George? George, you're muted.
I'll adjourn. I'll say aye. We're having such fun, but
Brenda?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Victor?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Al?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Eveline?
aye.
Libby?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
And last but not least, Evan?
I'm gonna hang out for a little while longer if you don't mind, Bob. Aye. Aye.